Hi everyone and welcome to today's painting tutorial. So today I'll take you through how I painted this Space Marine from the Void Tridents chapter. Now this was actually a request submitted by one of my YouTube subscribers, so please feel free to leave a comment below of a chapter that you might like to see me do in the near future. So over a Chaos Black undercoat, I decided to go with approximately 70% Cantor Blue and 30% Abaddon Black. Now, if you do plan on doing an army of this, I'm sure it would be fine to do just Cantor Blue as a base coat, and then perhaps shade the recesses with something like Drakenhof Nightshade or Nuln Oil. But I did decide I wanted to really darken down that blue a little bit more, so I decided to go with the mix that I did. Alternatively, you could get an empty pot and mix them together with the ratios that I've just mentioned. But either way should work just fine. And the first highlight I'll be doing is with Vallejo Blue, and this is a really beautiful blue. I actually just bought this as I wanted to test it out. I'm a pretty big fan of blue. It's definitely one of my favorite colors, and it's absolutely one of my favorite blues, so I highly recommend you give this one a shot as well. And it worked as a perfect highlight for what I was going for this chapter in particular. So as you can see, just really taking my time and just gradually building up those highlights. And of course, just making sure I leave plenty of that darker blue in and around the power armor, as the Void Tridents, from what I could gather from the artwork that I'd seen, it is a pretty dark sort of blue. But I did want it to pop a little bit still, so. So with the Vallejo Blue now done, I decided to use Calidor Sky as the second highlight, and this will actually be the final highlight for the armor. As again, the Void Tridents armor is quite dark, but I just wanted it to be brought out that little bit more. So just really fine edge highlights for all of this. And for the next step, I decided to work on the helmet, and this will also apply for the crest and for the shoulder pad trim as well. So I decided to go with, because it is copper for all of those, of course, so I decided to go with old copper from my Scale 75 copper series set. But of course, if you have some of the coppers from other ranges, such as Citadel, for example, I'm sure they'll work just fine as well. I was just a really big fan of all of the metallics from Scale 75, so they're definitely my go-to. For the most part, though, when doing metallics, I do like some of the Citadel range as well. And overall, one coat should do just fine for the old copper, as we will be building that up a little bit more. And also shading it down. So with the copper, the old copper now applied, I'm just going to use some Agrax Earthshade to begin shading throughout all of the recesses of the helmet. And as you can see, I'm just applying that pretty carefully. I just don't want to get it all over the copper. But if you do, don't stress. You can always just go back and go over those areas with the old copper again. And for the first highlight, I decided to use Victorian Brass by Scale 75. Now this is also one of the copper colors from the Copper Series Scale 75 paint set. I highly recommend you check out their metallic paint sets. In fact, just their paint sets in general. They're definitely affordable and they come with some awesome colors. So definitely worth checking out. I have mentioned in one of my previous videos, one of my earlier videos I would say, that when I first kind of got back into Warhammer, I pretty much strictly used Citadel paints. But as I began to become more experimental with how I approach painting, I did find myself testing out, you know, Vallejo products, Scale 75 and so on. So it's definitely something worth doing. I would also recommend just having a read online to see what are some of you know, some other people's favorite colors, for example. It can definitely be useful, as I did just that a little while ago, and I came across a color called Smoky Ink. that I now use for the barbed wire on my bases, for example. So yeah, definitely worth having a little look around, having a little read, see what people are using and what they recommend. And now just to finish off the copper, I'm just going to use some Amber Alchemy by Scale 75. Again, comes from the Copper Series paint set. Now, as much as I try to do fine edge highlights with metallics, sometimes I find that stippling works a little bit better for them. For some reason, it's just the way that the metallic paint looks. Stippling can look quite nice, so getting a few edge highlights in is definitely useful, but I like to just gradually build up with a little bit of stippling as well. So with the copper now done, I decided to move on to the lenses. So again, based off the artwork that I had to work with, I decided to go with a blue-green for the lenses. So Sotek green being one of my favorite colors alongside Temple Guard blue. I just decided to go with those. So as you can see, I've just carried over some of the Temple Guard blue and mixed that with a little bit of white. Alternatively, you could just use some Baharoth blue, but since I already had the paints on my palette, I just decided to just mix in a little bit of the white, Temple Guard blue with the white. So with the lenses now done, I decided to move on to the shoulder pad, and this will also apply for the back of the backpack as well, and for the left knee pad. So this will be quite transparent initially, so I did end up doing a few coats of this, I think about 3. Alternatively, you could just work out with Celestra Grey, but I decided just to go straight with Ulthuan Grey. And also just to get started on the metallic parts, I decided just to go with lead belcher. I like to keep the metal parts of my Space Marines pretty simple, just to keep a lot of the focus on the more exciting colours of the power armor, for example. So as you can see, the Ulthuan Grey came together really nicely. You just have to be pretty patient with it. It can take a little while to build it up nicely, but when you get it to a nice smooth finish like this, it's always a really good feeling. And it's the perfect colour to start building up with highlights of white as well. And just adding some stippling through the center, as I didn't want it to be sort of a little bit bland, just with the edge highlights. And now just to start shading some of the metallics, I'm just going to use some Nuln Oil. And usually one coat of this will do just fine. I tend to apply it quite liberally and then just sort of move it around. So for the next step, I decided to go ahead and do all of the symbols. So that'll be the chapter symbol and then just some unit symbols as well. And I decided to use Mephiston Red for this step. So as you can see, just really taking my time, and I have barely anything on my brush, and also just keeping it in a downward angle, just using my Raphael 8404 size 1 for this one. Now for this step, don't stress too much if you make a couple of mistakes, because you can always just go back to the white and just very lightly touch it up. But as I usually say, it's always best just to try and get it right the first time. So just really take your time. There's absolutely no rush with details like this. So as you can see now, I'm just touching up some of those, I mean, the errors aren't really too bad at this point, but I just wanted to tidy up some of the lines, just make them a little bit neater, a little bit straighter. So as I mentioned before, you can use white. You can also just go back and use some of the Ulthorn grey as well, as it's just a little bit more subtle. So through the center part of the symbol, for example, I'm just going to use some Ulthorn grey to correct that. So as you can see with the knee pad symbol, I was pretty happy with that overall, so I only needed to touch that up a little bit, just to straighten out some of those lines. As you can see, it's already taken me quite a while to paint these as well, but again, it's just absolutely worth just really taking your time and practicing these things, as you'll find you become a much better painter really, really quickly if you trial out painting things that are a little bit more complex like this. So long as you have the tools for the job as well, you just need even just the one brush. I mentioned before the Raphael 8404 size 1 that I use for details like this. The Winsor and Newton range are also really good, and I'm certain that there is a large variety of really good paintbrushes out there that would be perfect for doing details like this. But with the other two symbols now done, I'm just going to begin painting the chapter symbol for the Void Trident. So this one was one of those ones that I looked at and it looked relatively easy, just sort of looking at it at first glance, but painting it was another thing entirely. It was definitely pretty complicated, this one. So it might be worthwhile if you are planning on doing a whole army of this, or even a kill team, as one of my YouTube subscribers mentioned that they were doing when they requested that I paint the Void Tridents chapter. You might want to practice this on a paint palette, for example, or even just some old models that you aren't using anymore. And as always, just make sure that you have an image, whether it's on your computer or on your phone next to you, or if you've drawn it down yourself. It's always just really, really good, especially when practicing things like this, just to have something to just glance over at whilst painting. So as you can see, the right hand side here of the chapter symbol is a little bit too thick, and also the center as well, but it's no issue because I can always go back and fix that up with Hawthorn Grey and highlight around it with some white as well. And as I've mentioned in previous videos as well, when it comes to correcting a symmetrical chapter symbol like this, just make sure that you keep looking back at the other side of the chapter symbol, just to make sure that it's as even as you can possibly get it. Especially considering it's on a three-dimensional surface as well, so obviously it's a little bit more difficult as opposed to if it were on a flat piece of paper or just a flat surface in general. So with everything mostly done at this point, I just wanted to finish off the final touches of the gun and all of the pouches just by simply using some German grey, and this is all just going over the black that I use by Vallejo. Now, as I mentioned a few times in previous videos, I do like to use the black by Vallejo more so than the Abaddon black a lot of the time, especially for things like this or for bolt guns and whatnot. As it just has more of a matte finish than the Abaddon black does. And just keeping these details pretty simple, as I wanted the focus to be, on other parts of the miniature, such as the power armor and the helmet, for example. So for the gun and for the pouches, I am just going to be doing German grey and a simple highlight of Dawnstone to finish them off. So I'll just be showing you the pouch for the purposes of this, but the same steps apply for the gun as well. And as you can see, just every now and then it's absolutely fine to go back to the previous colour, for this, in this case, the German grey, and just touch up those details. If you find that the Dawnstone highlights were a little bit too thick. But at that point I was really happy with how they looked. And now just to finish off the gunmetal, I'm just going to use some Ironbreaker. Just to bring out those details a little bit more. And here are some photos of the completed Void Trident, so I hope you found this tutorial useful today. A big thank you to Plymouth Copeland for the request of this chapter. If you have a chapter in mind that you'd like to see me paint down the track, please leave a comment below. I'll also leave a video for the Golden Arm and for the Urban Warfare bases of my Space Marines in the description below. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one.